time on Poll Hub, showdown in the city of brotherly love. Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump squared off this week in their first presidential debate. We have our analysis, including whether or not the debate made a difference. Plus, we have our latest national NPR PBS News Marist poll results out. Where does the presidential contest stand? We'll tell you. And is it time for a nap? Not to worry, Lee's fun fact won't put you to sleep. This is Poll Hub. Let's get to it. And hi, everybody, and welcome to Poll Hub. I'm Mary Griffith.
I'm Hunter Petro.
And I am Lee Marigoff.
Well, as we record this week's podcast, it is Wednesday, the day after the showdown between Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump. They debated on Tuesday evening. And needless to say, Lee, there were some fireworks. What's your take?
In a sentence, it was a good night for Kamala Harris because she had to convince people that she was up to the job. She was less well known going in, which is odd because she's vice president, but certainly Donald Trump was a more known entity on that kind of platform, on that kind of stage. So I think that the bottom line is no one's popping champagne. There's not like going to be a total jumping of the ship. She's not going to open up a 10-point lead, but there was little doubt by the reactions from the two campaigns and by some of the more focused, ideologically conservative commentators that she won the night. She took the fight to him. There's a lot more to say about it, but the bottom lines are that the CNN quick snapshot poll had it at 63-37, which is pretty much the opposite of what Trump and Biden were last time. There was a focus group that had 13 undecided people in Erie, Pennsylvania, and then they went 8 for Harris, 4 for Trump, and 1 remained undecided. We could talk a lot more about the specifics if you want, but I think that I'll say one more thing. I keep wanting to say just one more thing. It reminded me of a debate previously when John F. Kennedy debated in 1960, when Ronald Reagan debated in 1980, and when Barack Obama debated in 2008. Although Reagan was not young, but they were all new to that stage, and they had to solve a political problem. They had to convince people of something. They had to reassure in some way that they could sit in the Oval Office. And I think the bottom line for last night was that she reassured people who were supporting her and also people, as few as they are, who are on the fence, that she could handle the job. So I think that's the bottom line. And that's all. That was my last one more thing to say. I'll have more to say later.
Well, I will say that I think there are 3 words to describe Harris and her performance last night, and those are prepared, impassioned, and optimistic. And I think that was really in stark contrast to what I would consider the grumpy old man persona of Donald Trump. He came across, I think, Lee, we spoke with Barb after the debate last night. I believe it was she who said that he came across as angry, and I completely agree. People were looking for Harris to make the case against Trump, and I think that she really did that flawlessly. Not just that, but she really took the power away from Trump from the very, very beginning of the debate. She laid the groundwork. She said, look, we're going to hear from the former president who he's going to use the tired old playbook, in her words. He's going to be name calling. He's going to be spewing names at me and at others. And so by doing that, she undercut him from the get-go and said, this is what you're going to expect. So she undercut his strategy from the beginning of the debate. And I think it was Chris Wallace who said post-debate that the debate was almost as devastating as the Biden-Trump debate was, which obviously ended Biden's campaign in June. Now, I don't necessarily think that that's a little bit too far to go, but I will say that it was certainly a blow to the Trump campaign. And Harris came to play and she showed up. Hunter, I want to bring you in just a second because obviously you have a very different generational lens through which to view the debate. But Lee, I want to bring in some numbers from our NPR PBS News Marist poll that we released on the morning of the debate. And we asked Americans if they planned to watch all or most of the debate. And 70% said that they planned to do so. And an additional 23% said that though they didn't plan to watch the debate, they were going to be following coverage of the debate. In addition, 30% of Americans said that the debate would matter a great deal or good amount in deciding their vote. Is this engagement, is this influence that Americans were sharing with us typical of expectations going into a debate, or does this really speak to the unprecedented nature of this particular campaign?
Well, to some degree, I think the latter. It speaks to the unprecedented nature of what we've got here. Because you have two camps, they're fairly evenly divided in terms of their support, and then you have some folks who are legitimately trying to figure out where they want to go with this thing and who they want to support. So I think to that degree, it's unprecedented. And look, there's some people who wait for the train wreck or whatever. They want to see. Last time, it was a big deal. Now, the Biden fiasco. Now, keep in mind, in 2016, Hillary Clinton beat, by all estimates, Donald Trump 3 times in 3 debates, and obviously didn't win the election. I think this was a little bit different. This was a very known entity trying to tie Kamala Harris to the Joe Biden administration, make him more of the change agent because he would shake things up, and her more the status quo. She wanted to be the change agent and make him the old news. I think she won that battle. I think she was new, fresh, and lively, and he was very much in his grumpy, as you said, his grumpy stage. And I think, our old departed dear friend Tim Russert used to say that politics is kind of easy. You say you're going to do it, you do it, and then you say you've done it. So you alluded to her opening statement. She set the table. Then she stuck very much to her themes, didn't get distracted, didn't go for any of the baits. And then at the end, I was teaching my class at Marist last night. We were all watching the debate, the whole class. And I said, you're in good shape if at the end of the debate, your closing statement goes right back to the beginning and you don't feel like you have to fix something that happened during the debate. Her closing statement could have been changed with her opening statement. They were the same, almost identically. Donald Trump was winging it in his closing statement. That's not a good time to be winging it because you feel like you have things you got to fix. And so clearly, look, he went into the spin room afterwards. And when candidates go into the spin room, it's not because they want to meet the press. They think they've had a subpar performance, and there's no way of saying it other than that. It was a subpar performance. And then the campaign goes on. I mean, again, there were very few undecided voters. It's about enthusiasm and their fundraising and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But I want to turn to Hunter on this, because I have a question, but I first want to get your reaction to all this and where we are in this election. And then I have a real generational thing to ask.
So I have to say, it was a very stressful night for me. It was very interesting, even leading into it. Look, it was the candidates' first time meeting. Trump and Harris had never met before in person. So it was going to be very interesting, in my opinion, to see how Trump treated Harris and vice versa. Harris, in my opinion, had 2 jobs, and that was to be professional and to connect to the actual Americans, to give some kind of statement or some kind of words that made Americans feel like they were being heard finally. And I think she did her job on that, especially when it came to her abortion response. She had examples that connected right back into the day-to-day lives of Americans. And I think Trump really struggled to do that. And a perfect example of that is when Harris, who did a great job at getting under his skin appropriately last night too, was when Harris said that people leave Trump's rallies early. And that led to him somehow screaming about how people are eating the dogs and how the pets and the cats are being eaten. And the way he can just jump right into the craziest thing when someone gets under his skin.
In class, before the debate, we talked about the alleged dog eating or the fictional dog eating by these people. And the class said to a person, if he goes into that, this man is grabbing for straws. And so, and when he did that, that was obviously a hello, what's going on here?
He got fact checked and then he said, but I saw it on TV. I will also say my biggest thing is that, I don't know if you guys noticed this, but Trump didn't look at Harris all night. He couldn't make eye contact with her. And she was looking at him. Every point she would make, she would look at him. She'd look at the moderators. He could not take his eyes off the camera or the moderators.
Mary, as a TV person, how did you react to how they use the camera and use the stage?
Well, I mean, using the camera and using the stage that way, I mean, I think it was pretty standard in terms of, the full screen versus the split screen. But Hunter, to your point about Trump not engaging with Vice President Harris, I had this eerie flashback to 2016 in that notorious town hall where Donald Trump was almost stalking Hillary Clinton and lurking. And it was almost like, I really don't even know how to describe it, but it was this throwback, and not a good throwback, in a sense of disassociating his opponent as a person and just disregarding, which it just from basic courtesies. I mean, he didn't even go over to Harris to shake her hand at the beginning of the debate. And it's almost this insular view that came across and this just off-putting sense that I came away from thinking back to 2016.
Yeah, he was dismissive of her, but not welcoming or engaging of the audience either. So she made her points. I mean, she was, throwing daggers, but she was also talking to the country. And I thought that was different. What did you guys think of the handshake in the beginning? I may have gotten the words wrong, but my understanding is that she said, "Hi, I'm Kamala Harris. Let's have a good debate." And I just thought that was, and he looked like he was very unhappy. Before we move on, I did want to get Hunter's reaction to Taylor Swift. Now, I like Taylor Swift is not a friend of mine. I know Taylor Swift, but let me say this. Okay, to my generation, that almost stole a little of the thunder, but I have a feeling you have a different take on that. What was your take on the fact that Taylor Swift came out and endorsed last night?
Well, I think that it's telling enough that within 14 hours, her endorsement post on Instagram alone has almost 9 million likes on it. And that's not even going across all of her social medias. I personally don't put too much weight into celebrity endorsements, but I do know a lot of my friends do put weight into celebrity endorsements, especially celebrities like Taylor Swift, because she isn't someone who is just lollygag here or there, not really serious about it. She knows what she's talking about. She's been involved in politics on her own front since at least 2018. But yeah, I don't know. Mary, you might have a better
I
perspective
certainly
on
don't
this.
have a better perspective on that. It's a generational point of view that I completely agree with and respect. Before we move on to our related topic, Lee, I wanted to get your take. You mentioned earlier the campaign goes on from here. So from a strategic standpoint, what does the Trump campaign need to do and what does the Harris campaign need to do?
The Trump people have no choice but to say that this was a rigged debate. It was Harris and two moderators, 3 against 1. And this is the shadow of the Biden administration. It's more of the same. He has no choice but to go there and keep his base solid and hope for a big turnout against what might have been some kind of radical Marxist opponent. He has no option but to do that.
Right. As we alluded to earlier, we released new national polling numbers on the morning of the debate yesterday with our polling partners, NPR and PBS News. These numbers were very interesting. We found Harris with a 49% to the 48% for Trump. But once we open that to definite voters, she opens up about a 3-point edge among those voters. So it's a little interesting, but I think we're going to jump into Lee to help break down those numbers a little bit.
Yeah, and don't expect the polls to change overwhelmingly as a result of the debate. It was all about enthusiasm of your base and also getting a few convincing of undecided voters. Okay, bottom line in all this is, for me, and the debate does not contradict this, is that we're on the throes of a record-breaking gender gap, and we saw it in this poll. He, going into the debate, carried his men by 12 points. She carries women by 15 points, which is a 27-point gap by gender. And that is, to use Donald Trump's expression, huge. Okay, I mean, you don't get much more than that. Interestingly, I think that she does much better going into the debate on honest and trustworthiness and caring about people like you. He does much better on being a strong leader. Now, what was interesting, to go back to the debate, given these numbers, was that she was talking about being a good leader and he was trying to make her into a liar. So they both went after each other's, in a sense, vulnerabilities to try to kind of like chip away at it. We also saw that independents, Latinos, these are groups that she is having trouble with, and maybe some independents moved. I'm not sure there'll be much difference among Latinos, but these are small subgroups, and the margin of error is wider for them. And I think one other number that really jumps out at me is the share of the white vote that Harris is getting. Hillary Clinton got 37% of the whites. Joe Biden had 41% of the white vote 4 years ago. She's in the mid-40s right now among whites. So if she's having any kind of problem with people of color or maybe independents, she's going to more than offset that among white support. And that mostly is white women. And that's where her strong suit is.
You know, I do want to point out that the 1 point difference between Harris and Trump is definitely well within the margin of error. So the contest is very competitive. Lee, you mentioned the differences among some of the key voting groups. I did want to point out that this is our first survey since Robert F. Kennedy Jr. decided to drop out of the race. Lee, is this significant? What are we seeing in terms of support for each of the candidates?
Yeah, it's funny because my old time worn view of politics is that when people drop out, they don't drop out because they have a huge amount of support to then distribute. They drop out because they're not doing well. And I don't think the whole Robert Kennedy saga, which was clearly he was put up to this with a lot of conservative money. They thought he was going to take votes away from Joe Biden. In our poll way back in the beginning, we said he's drawing evenly. And more recently, he was taking more votes from Donald Trump. So now you have a situation where he drops out, endorses Trump, and actually is suing to get off the ballot. Usually you sue to get on the ballot and say, I've got credible signatures. He's saying, I don't deserve to be on the ballot. I got to get off. The bottom line, this is not going to determine the election, although minor party candidates do get votes. And you have to watch for the Jill Stein vote. That was a big deal in 2016. And the difference between Clinton winning in states and Trump winning in states was a lot of votes that went to Jill Stein. So that needs to be watched. Robert Kennedy is going to end up that candidacy in the dustbin of history.
Yeah, definitely. I think it was interesting to see the 14-point shift once Kennedy dropped out and the way that the numbers for another party's candidate in our poll here were about 1%.
Yeah.
It's interesting because, we know how this works. The timing, it's September, the election's getting closer. People are realizing those third-party candidates aren't viable options, and it needs to be either Vice President Harris or former President Trump. And we're seeing those numbers starting to come together into a two-candidate race, as it always really was. But what's really interesting to me, and it's going to connect back a little bit to the debate, but we saw that the candidate, former President Trump, seems to pull stronger on immigration with 53% of Americans trusting him, economy, 52% of Americans trusting him, and the Middle East with 51% of Americans trusting him. And Harris was strongest on abortion with 56% of Americans supporting her on that. But I think it's super interesting because if we think about the debate last night and the moments where each candidate really tried to hit their marks and talk the most, I think I heard immigration and economy out of Trump's mouth the most, and we heard abortion out of Harris's mouth the most. And the Middle East was such an interesting topic to me because Harris tried to walk such a fine line. And my question for you guys is, do you think walking a fine line on this is going to end up setting off both sides against her? Or do you think like Trump seems to just be very pro-Israel? Do we think that this is the right move, walking that fine line, with the Middle East being a topic that's clearly not in any candidate's favor yet?
Yeah, I think events will dictate that, but go on.
What I was just going to say is I think that in Harris's case, she is, as Lee pointed out earlier, is trying to distance herself somewhat from the Biden administration. Clearly, she's part of the Biden administration. Harris has received quite a bit of criticism on her involvement at the border. And so she really does, in that sense, need to walk a fine line and try to pivot in some capacity as best she can to shirk off some of that criticism.
But if you're Donald Trump, then don't say, and by the way, the secret is Joe Biden hates you. If you're trying to tie them together, don't put a split in them. It just did not make sense.
When Trump claimed that Biden hated Harris, he also claimed that Waltz was a horrible and radical pick. But are we going to take a look at him and how he feels about his vice presidential candidate? Because then he went and said that he doesn't even talk to JD Vance about important things, like the abortion ban that JD came out
threw
and
him
said.
under the bus.
And we don't even need to talk about Mike Pence, obviously.
Yeah.
But it was a very interesting statement when I heard it come out of his mouth.
Well, a couple things just before we wrap, because we do need to move on. Lee, I was wondering if you would speak to the idea that among those who say they're definitely plan to vote, those differences on the issues, the who would better handle questions. Hunter pointed out immigration, the economy, that margin narrows a bit.
Oh, yeah. And ultimately, the definite votes are the ones, people who show up and participate are the ones who determine who wins and loses. And so it is interesting to see that not only has Harris made progress on, let's say, handling the economy, but when you look at the people who are definitely going to vote as opposed to just registered voters, as you say, those numbers get very close. And maybe this is a campaign that started on Labor Day. We've always had these one-year campaigns, but now you had new candidates show up in the 7th inning. And so maybe this is a traditional one like that.
And one thing I just want to point out is that 71% of Americans in our NPR PBS News Marist poll said they are motivated by hope and not fear when thinking about the presidential election. Clearly, Kamala Harris has been speaking to the future as opposed to the past, and that she has, as Lee, you would say, is polled very well in terms of her preparation leading into the debate.
Well, to paraphrase the debate last night, let's turn the page. I have 3 topics I know that you guys know I'm very connected to. One is politics. The other is sports. We're not going to talk about that today. The third one, however, is our fun fact, and that's whether you should take a nap. And so CBS asked, what would be, in essence, the ideal time length of a nap? And the one that was the plurality was 30 minutes to less than an hour. That was, if I can get my eyes on this, that was 36%. Next was 23% with less than 30 minutes, and an hour to less than an hour and a half that's almost like a good night's sleep already. That's not, I don't know if that's a nap or not. So naps are popular, and certainly, you're safe if you do an hour or less, and people are very comfortable with that, a majority of that. I was taking a nap yesterday when I got a call from a political consultant friend of mine. So there I had a combination of 2 of my interests connecting. But what do you, Mary, you live a very active life between work and 3 children. Are naps border on a good night's sleep? Or
what I will say is I'm not a fan of naps, because when I do nap, I tend to get into a very deep sleep for a short period of time, and then I'm completely foggy and it messes me up for the rest of the day. Hunter, what about you?
Yeah, I have to sort of agree with that, but obviously I am a college student. But the additional to that is that my ADHD is raging here at college. So I don't believe in naps. It is where I'll start. I can't, if I lay down in the bed in the middle of my day, I'll feel guilty and that I'm wasting time and doing stuff. But I will also say that as a college student, this option of about an hour and a half to 2 hours, that's just a good night's sleep for me at this point. So,
and I think that we'll leave it right there. Okay, we'll catch up with you next week. Have a good nap, everybody.
That'll do it for Poll Hut this week.
Poll Hub is produced by the Marist Poll at Marist College in Poughkeepsie, New York.
Mary Griffith is our executive producer. Casey Schaff is our production supervisor.
The Poll Hub team includes Athen Hollis, Delaney Hayes, and Hunter Petro.
If you enjoy Poll Hub, consider telling a friend about us.
If you'd like to learn more about polling and survey science, check out the Marist Poll Academy, our free online learning portal.
If you have questions for us, tweet them at us at Marist Poll.
Remember, you can always tell your smart speaker to play Poll Hub, and with any luck, it'll cooperate.
And finally, wherever you listen to Poll Hub, there is a subscribe button.
Click it, and the latest episode will be ready for you
In your podcasting app as soon as it's released.
We'll see you next time.